Hello, this training is called Innovative Practice Using Microsoft Tools. This recording is for those people who were in the IB session, which I hope you very much enjoyed when I delivered this training this morning on the 6th of September. So the principal focus of this is going to be some ideas for how you might use assignments, which we're rolling out from this week. So that's going to be section 1 and is the major focus of this training. The second section, which is about grades and insights. Grades and insights are data contain data which come from assignments. So in 3 or 4 weeks time, you'll have lots of information in there to use and look at. Then there's two slightly more general sets of topics. One is just generally what's new. Microsoft have ever so slightly wound me up by releasing some things on like the 31st of August and the 1st of September this year, but some of them are quite interesting and perhaps useful for you to explore. And then just a quick reminder at the very end of the sort of the maintenance tasks that you need to do for the start of term. Thank you very much to everybody who's already unarchived their rhetoricians folders. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. So this first section, using assignments with rich content, I put in there, and you'll see why as we go through. So just a reminder of what was discussed in June and an update of what was discussed in June for those people who weren't here in June. We're going to set all studies on assignments. Firefly is no longer accessible to pupils. Do not set studies on Firefly because the pupils will not be able to see them. Also, just to highlight, it's not going to be okay to tell a pupil that they should have remembered to do their studies if the teacher hasn't put it on assignments. Assignments is where the studies go. That's it. Other things can also go on assignments, other tests and so on that you do in class, but studies must go on assignment. If they're not on assignments, the reality is from this year that you shouldn't expect the student to do them. They might, if they have an excellent memory or they happen to be flicking through that bit of the class notebook anyway, but that's where we're going to be telling pupils to go for to find out what they need to do on a nightly basis. In June we had some in-person training. Thank you very much for that, Mel Walsh, and some video training. And I will post the video again for new people. That was very practical. That was how do you actually do this? Where do you type the date? Where do you type who you want it to be sent to, and so forth. Today, I'm assuming that knowledge. So if you can't remember, the advantage of this being online is you can go back and watch that video first. It's about 15 minutes. Well, there's a short version at the beginning. You can watch the first minute perhaps to remind yourself. But there's a 15-minute video there for you to watch about how you actually set a task on assignments. This video is more about what you can do to enrich that experience and perhaps save yourself a little bit of work. So you can just write down in an assignment, go to page 34 of the textbook and write it down in your orange, write the answers down in your orange exercise book. That's literally old school and may well work. But I think exploring some of the advanced features that are available in assignments, and particularly how it connects with OneNote, can really help you lighten your load. So what I mean by this is that if you have a worksheet in OneNote and that OneNote page becomes an assignment, first of all, it saves you distributing the page because that happens when you distribute the assignment. So top tip number 1, if you're going to set something in an assignment, don't distribute it as a page. So have a separate page for the assignment. And also you can put lots of rich content in there, such as videos and images and so forth. But also it streamlines, as I'll show you shortly, the marking process. So my absolute number 1 recommendation is, even if you only do it for studies, have it in OneNote. That doesn't mean that we're going paperless. As one of my mantras has been for the last 2.5 years, we're not going paperless. We're going digital, yes, but not paperless. The pupils can do a piece of work on paper and then scan it into OneNote. And that has its advantages too. They could do the work straight in OneNote. They all have a stylus theoretically, and I'm going to be emphasizing to them starting Tuesday afternoon with lower grammar and poetry, why it's really important, and that it is really important. If they lose their stylus, they have to get another one straight away. So in order to set a OneNote page as an assignment, I'm sorry, this is just screenshots rather than the video. There's just too many things for me to run through to do the video just now, but there is some great OneNote training on Microsoft Learn, which I'll flag up to you later. So first of all, don't distribute the page in the normal way. Then you set the assignment using the Create menu and in Assignments, and you click Attach under the instructions. And then it's pretty self-explanatory. It takes you through where the page is and where you want pupils to be able to find it. And then the pupil experience is that when they click on the assignment, the page in Class Notebook just appears. They can go into Class Notebook and do it there, but they can also do it directly in Teams. And so can you when you're marking, which means you don't have to go through Class Notebook and find the right page for everybody, which is really helpful. You can immediately just click Next Student and you get the next student's work. It's really quick. Just to go off on a tangent for a second before I go back to OneNote, Forms, which is something that those of us who were here back in the pandemic used quite extensively, I think. Forms is getting more and more powerful all the time, and Forms can be integrated into assignments. So if you've got a Forms quiz that you created with all the answers in it, perhaps it's self-marking, you can just set that as the assignment, and it self-marks and it goes into the gradebook, which is great. And there's a new feature which I'm going to show you the QR code for the link later, which is you can now import a paper or PDF quiz into Forms. It doesn't save you all of the work because you still have to put in the answers and check the formatting and so on, but it does a lot of the typing for you and the separating it out into questions, which is really good. More labour-saving devices here. If you've got an assignment, or your colleague in a team that you're in has got an assignment that you want to reuse, so for example, if one syntax biology teacher has set a test or a revision exercise and another one is in that team and wants to reuse it, you can just reuse that assignment without having to type it all out again. And that can also be done from archived class teams. There's no use for us this year, but in 23-24, when we're setting our syntax coursework, for example, if it's the same as it was in 22-23 this year, just reuse the one from this year's syntax team, which hopefully will become increasingly powerful as we build up a bank of resources. It is worth, therefore, thinking about this from a departmental point of view. In music coursework, and I know in a lot of other subjects, particularly for essays, you have these kind of grids that enable you to mark different sort of aspects of the piece of work. So this is a music example. I don't apologise for being subject specific to my own subject because this is what I've been playing with. You'll notice if you're looking very carefully, I've actually done this wrong, and it goes from 8 marks for poor technique to 1 mark for convincing technique, which is the wrong way around. But anyway, I will mark this according to Edexcel's grid, and then I will tell the people that they've got 12 marks. And then the people will tell me, this is in pre-assignments time, the people will tell me that they don't understand why they got 12, and I will explain them. I'll show them this grid. Actually, you can put this grid in the first place, click basic, unsuitable, and fluent. It works out it's 12 and tells all of that information to the pupil immediately. And you can add extra feedback under each one as well. It's a really quick way, when there are marking grids involved, of communicating that to the pupils. And the way you do that is the first time you create an assignment that has one of these grids, which is called a rubric in Teams because it's such an American piece of software, you create the rubric, but once you've done it once, you can reuse it in other assignments, which is great. Another labour-saving device related to reusing previous assignments. You can set assignments to multiple classes in one go. So if it's a piece of English coursework and it's due in for all say grammarians to get it in by the 7th of June, the head of department could do that for all of the classes because the head of department is in all of the teams. So it means that all of the coursework comes in together. You could divide up who would mark which set, or you can even, as I'll come on to later, anonymize the marking, which is really good. Teams, you will have noticed, does have this extra feature that Firefly didn't, where Firefly said that something would be due in on a particular date. Teams decides that it's going to be in at a particular time, and it defaults to 23:59. Now, there are a couple of impacts there. One, if you switch on the facility for it to be in the pupil and staff or group calendar, it appears right at 23:59, which is outside of the default view, so people can't see it. The other thing is you might actually want it in quite regularly. If you're setting lower grammar studies on a Tuesday and you want it in before their lesson on a Thursday, the real deadline is not 23:59 on the Thursday or even 23:59 on a Wednesday, but 10:05 on a Thursday. So if you go to the cog at the top right of the assignment tab in a class team, you could change that default time just for that class to say 10:05. Or if you prefer 8:15, the end of studies the previous evening. And that means that every time you set the date, it will default to that time rather than 23:59, which I think is a pretty poor default time, I have to say. But you can change that. But that's different for each class. Where using OneNote with Teams is really, really, really powerful is when you're marking. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, it just shows you everybody's work in order. It's like it's all put in a neat pile for you, and you don't even have to go and find it in class notebook. It's just there. Even if the pupils have scanned in a piece of lined paper, the piece of lined paper is there on your screen for you able to draw on with the stylus, which is, I think, a huge time saver compared to having to make sure you've got all the right books and opening them on the right page and so on. The other feature which that introduces, which is on the top right of this screen here, there I'll highlight it there, is you can switch off the student's name. So you'll see it just says student here, and it shuffled the order of them. They're not in alphabetical order. So you can mark it knowing that you're totally free of bias. Of course, if you recognize the handwriting, you recognize the handwriting, but it's as free of bias as you reasonably can be. Again, that's a really powerful tool, especially if you're doing anything right at the beginning of term to remove any of those slight biases to do with EAL students. As Emma was mentioning yesterday, EAL does not seem to be a barrier at Stonyhurst to achieving great GCSE and A-level results. The other really useful thing here, and something I've been using as I've been preparing for the first week, is Student View. So throughout assignments, click on the ellipsis. Sorry to patronize you by saying what the ellipsis is, but a couple of people asked me the other day and I thought I'm just going to tell everybody. Ellipsis means 3 dots. There we go. Never need to say it again. But the Student View appears under that ellipsis icon in various places where you've set an assignment or you've given a mark, and what that's useful for is seeing what the student's going to see. I think with Firefly, those of us who were here the last few years, over 5 years with Firefly, we kind of got a sense of what the student experience was, and we don't have the same thing with Teams generally, but particularly with assignments. So you can see exactly what a student will see for the assignment you've just set, which will reassure you, I hope, that you have done the right thing. Now, all of that generates a huge amount of data, because now all of the students' engagement with the platform, I mean, not just handing in work, but literally what files they clicked on and at what time they clicked on them, how long they've spent looking at that team, that's all recorded. There are things we can do with that data. Now, in terms of a mark book, where we keep most of our personal data as teachers, I would say that many of us are very happy. I've spoken with Ben O'Connor about a really great Excel mark book that he uses. There are people, of course, who use physical mark books in the teacher planners, and that's all great. If your solution works, don't change it. I'm not suggesting that Teams is great as a mark book. I would probably say that it's not, in fact. But because the data is there anyway, and because the pupils do get to see that data, or some of it, it's actually really important that you know what it is that is there. So within each team, this data, by the way, is not real data. That's why I haven't blurred any of it out. It's actually fake data produced by Microsoft. If you click on this now, you won't see anything because you haven't set any assignments that you've marked yet. So when you go into the Insights tab or the Grades tab, you'll see that this is very early on in Microsoft's journey because they've actually misspelled assignments, which is great. There's a top bar which shows recent class performance compared to the rest of the year, and you decide what recent means. So there is a place where you decide whether it's 7 days or 28 days or a particular half term that you select the dates for. And there's lots of information just here about generally how's the class doing. So you can see that there are actually 5 children who have not even looked at the Othello task and 2 who still haven't looked at the Macbeth task, which was due yesterday. Crazy times. That would never happen at Stonyhurst. You can also see that on August 25th last year, there was this returned for revision. And this option was on Firefly as well. And I think it's quite powerful. If there's a piece of unsatisfactory work, rather than waiting for the lesson and saying, this was wrong for the following 25 reasons and you haven't done enough, and do you call this an hour's work and so forth, all the teacher stuff that we all say to them, you can just, when you mark it, you can press no, it's not good enough. And potentially the pupil might be able to turn it back around before the lesson comes where you are going to need to use that work to do something else. So that's potentially quite helpful. You can see that everyone's up to date, apart from the people who hadn't viewed Othello plus 1 more, and the people who hadn't viewed Macbeth plus 2 more who have viewed it but haven't done it anyway. And from this returned, that means you've marked it and handed it back. You can see that this teacher has not got on with their Othello and Macbeth marking yet, but Comedy of Errors is pretty much done apart from this 1 which was returned. So you can see the kinds of whole class data you can get. And there's lots of average grades and so on that you can see. The one thing I would say about average grades is that it's quite that's quite an American thing, in that they will have, rather than having a subject for a year, they might have a class that they take for a term. And then even if they stay in the same subject, it's a different class within that subject the next term. The option system works a bit differently. And so if you look at these graphs, I think these graphs which are available, if your data is comparable from assignment to assignment throughout the year, then it'll work quite well. If not, it's possibly more geared towards the American market than the British market. You can see that Microsoft in their example data have managed to get an almost perfect bell curve with a slight sort of bump to the top end, just to demonstrate that, you know, Teams is used by really good schools. I think that's what they're doing there. That's the distribution line. Then there's the trend. There's a trend line there, and you can do the trend line for individuals. So you can see that this girl, again, she's fictional, so I haven't blurred her out. Crystal McKinney is slightly above the average until this one thing, early September, and then she goes back above it again. Now, if the average mark for a test is going to be 66 one week, 90 the next, 40 the next, 82 the next, this is not necessarily going to be useful data for you, but it's useful for you to know that it's there. That's it for assignments for the time being. For each of those tasks, I do them with my team for the first time. I'll video them and send out some links to those, because there's lots of there's lots of ideas, and it's going to be about experimenting with them. And as I think I said back in June, the most important thing is that you go and practice it. Set up, if you haven't got one already, a class team for your department or a group of people that you like working with, and set each other some studies. Nothing replaces that. You don't want to be sat with a YouTube video of me for an hour the first time. You actually want to use it. Learn how to use it first, but also trust your intuition. It's actually not that difficult, and you can't really break it. The worst thing you can do is you can accidentally set some kids some studies that you didn't mean to, and then you can delete it. There we go. So there is some other news. First of all, before you start teaching this week, there are 3 things I would like everybody to do, and I know some people have already got ahead with doing this. So whether you see the YouTube video here, YouTube icon here, that means there's already a YouTube video available in the digital practice team for you to look at. So it tells you how to do it. So 1, if there are any old class teams you want to use, unarchive them. So you need to make a decision with the incoming Syntaxians and Rhetoricians. Are they going to have a new folder? Number 1. Are they going to reuse their old folder? Do they need it at all? For the majority of subjects, Syntaxians and Rhetoricians will need their grammar and poetry folders respectively, so you'll need to unarchive those teams. You can see them in OneNote, but the pupils can't. Okay, so you need to follow those instructions and unarchive the teams. Also, you need to set up your new class teams in class notebooks. There are 2 separate things to do. You need to set up the class notebook if you're going to use it, and you need to activate the team. Those 2 are separate. You can do the one without doing the other. You can set up the class notebook now and activate the team later, and vice versa. Again, there's a YouTube video in the digital practice team to do that. The other thing, which every time there's an issue with getting people access to Teams in the middle of a year or at the beginning of a year, it seems to be around this. Please, can everybody make sure your academic director is in your departmental team so they can see that, and make sure that the head of department is in all class teams. And I'd add to that, the head of department should pick for each class another member of staff to be in that team as well. Because it's actually not about the head of department per se looking at what everybody's doing in their teams and checking and doing work scrutiny, though obviously that will be a function that will have to happen. But also because if the actual teacher of the class, which might be a HOD, is ill and can't set work, it's really helpful for another member of the department to be able to go in and look at where the kids are up to. So that 3rd bullet point is really split into 3. 1, put the academic director in the departmental admin team. 2, make sure the HOD is in all class teams as a single point of contact. And 3, for the HOD's classes, have another member of staff in those as well. And then at some point during the term, there's a couple of other tasks that it would be good to get on with. So first of all, Firefly is going soon. By the end of this term, you need to take anything away from Firefly that you want to keep, and that doesn't include new starters because you haven't got anything there. And we have actually said this a few times, but this time we really are switching off Firefly. The reason we didn't last time is because we thought we'd keep it on because we were in the middle of a contract. We are coming to the end of the contract. We have given notice. We are definitely not renewing. It will all go. Get all your stuff by the end of this term, please. And the other thing is, Teams is not the only platform in the world. It will sound like it is from the last sort of 25 minutes of my speaking. But look at any platforms your department subscribes to. We have a music one called Focus on Sound, and that integrates superbly with Teams. I can set the quizzes that they have on there directly from the cloud-based app that they have on the web, and the results that the kids get then end up in Teams as well. So I know that My Maths does have some level of Teams integration, but I don't know whether it imports marks. So the maths department, I would suggest, should go and have a look at whether it does. There will be other departments that use other platforms that I don't know about that you can go and experiment with and find out how much you can integrate with Teams, because the more data you can get into Teams, the more helpful it will be to you, and the more automatic things can be for you, the better. If you can avoid going to a website, copying and pasting the address and putting it in assignments, because you could have a button on the website, and that would be obviously really helpful to you. There are a few things that are new this half term. So first of all, forms quizzes, which you've used a little bit, can now be timed. So I'm thinking particularly for studies things, if you want somebody to fill something in on a form and you want them really to actually take 20 minutes rather than say they took 20 minutes and perhaps be distracted during studies or spend so long on it that you're ending up marking twice as much as you wanted to, you can actually now time them. There's a YouTube video which again I will give you a link to later, and it's in the description down below here. You can now scan and import paper and PDF quizzes to forms. It's kind of an early access feature. It's not really working 100%, but at the very least it saves you typing out the questions, even if it doesn't quite order them right. And of course it doesn't put the answers in. Every class team now has a home page. And I'm not quite sure how this is best used. If anybody else wants to have a play with it, that would be great. But you'll see there's a new tab on the left hand side in Teams. On every class team, you can click home page, and you'll see it's just got a little space for you to write an introduction, maybe a little biography of yourself. It also automatically gives the last few files that were uploaded to the Teams Files tab, and also on the left hand side the most recent assignments that were set. The other change, it's not a major change, but it might catch some people out, because we're getting rid of Firefly. We've changed how we log into Classus. So you go to the same place. You always had the option to log in with Microsoft. It just didn't work. Now the login with Firefly won't work, and the login with Microsoft will. So rather than clicking login with Firefly when you go into Classus, you now click on login with Microsoft. The same goes for the children as well. So I'm just moving myself up to the middle of the library there, so I'm out of the way of the text on this slide. There are lots of resources for you to continue working with this, and we're moving gradually, I think, as you'll tell from this presentation, from me showing you where to point and where to click in order to do the tasks that I'm telling you should do, to saying, look, we're all experienced professionals here. We now have got used to the way that Teams works. There's loads of training out there, much more than there was 2.5 years ago, because this has really been this is really a changed game now. You're responsible as professionals for working out what it is you need to develop your practice. I am here to help that and set pointers and facilitate. And yes, I will still, if you say, I don't know what to do, where do I click? I will still obviously do that, including sort of videos and things on that. But principally, the responsibility now goes to individual teachers, I would say. So in the digital practice team, there's last year's September shorts, as well as that's where I'll put a series of bespoke videos for impending tasks. So anything that's coming up, I'll let you have that. There's also, we'll have a chat Q&A there, rather than people asking me the same question 12 times by email. I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat, which means that on that team, which means that I can respond there, and if anybody else is having the same issue, they can see the answer. There's also the Microsoft Learn Educator Center. Returning staff are all Microsoft Innovative Educators, but Microsoft have actually done away with that accreditation for new people. It's now called Microsoft Educator, and it's actually 5.5 hours rather than the 2 hours, but it is a much more focused course. It's really good. I very strongly recommend it, especially for new people. It gives you some really good guidance on structuring teams, on using OneNote in a really rich way, and using PowerPoint Recorder as well, which is what I'm recording this on. Very, very good stuff. And there are 2 YouTube channels. Well, actually, there's 3 YouTube channels I think you should subscribe to. One of them is the Stonyhurst Digital Practice one, which is where you're watching this. But there we go. I've taken it away from Stonyhurst anyway, so you can do that. But of the ones that have more than 3 subscribers, we're looking at 2 in particular. Mike Tholson actually works for Microsoft Education, and every time a new feature comes out, particularly in Teams, but anything else that's interesting for education in Excel or Word or PowerPoint, he generally has a video ready to go explaining what those features are. So that's a good one to subscribe to. And then there's Kevin Stratford, who doesn't do quite as much reactive stuff to new features, but because he no longer works for Microsoft, he actually does do more general things. So his most recent video was a really short 50-second video on how you pin an application you use quite frequently to the taskbar, so you can access it from the taskbar at the bottom of the screen really, really quickly when you need it. He's got things on video editing and all sorts as well. It's a really good channel. They're quite different channels, but both worth subscribing to. And these are the links for those channels, amongst other things. So here we've got Mike Tholson's channel. You can scan that QR code with your phone. Here's Kevin Stratford. Here's the video that I promised you on importing paper or PDF quizzes into forms. And this one is just something I thought would be nice to do. It's a new term. Go and load that up in Spotify. If you scan it with your phone, you'll get it on Spotify. It'll open it automatically, and just whack it on while you're preparing your classroom later, or maybe on the commute home, and hopefully it'll let you go home in a calm sort of mood. Thank you very much for listening. I know it's been a slightly dull half-hour video, whereas it could have been a very exciting 45-minute presentation in person, I suppose. But I hope you use those saved 15 minutes to great advantage. Please do be in touch if I can help with anything, either in person or in that chat Q&A, or give me a ring on extension 247. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you about the place over the next few days.